Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. Well, usually I talk about photography related subjects, but and the thing is, when I started this channel, it wasn't my intent to be a completely photography focused channel, because I do have a lot of interests. And people who have been following the channel for a long time know that I have a science education and that I have experience as a scientific researcher, and that I also have experience as a technical sales rep and application specialist. I sold high-end digital imaging systems for laboratory research, among other things. The digital imaging thing might have something to do with why I like photography. So yeah, I have a master's degree from University of Illinois, Chicago in molecular biology. I got my bachelor's degree at Northern Illinois University out on the frigid plains. And after graduate school, I went to work as an infectious disease researcher for a pharmaceutical company. Realized that I didn't want to stay in the lab my entire career. I kind of had a decision of, well, go back and get a PhD or do something else. I decided to go into technical sales. One of the things about me is that I'm fairly sensitive to scientific inaccuracies that I see. So, over the weekend, Beth and I watched the first episode of Lessons in Chemistry, which is about a young woman who was going into science in the early 1950s. And the focus is on kind of the sexual discrimination that took place at the time. And it didn't just take place in that time. In my research career, I actually saw it. It happened. It still happens. It shouldn't happen. But that's not the focus of what I'm going to talk about. And I'm only going to talk about the first episode. I haven't seen any of the others. I haven't read the book. And maybe the book is different. So if you've read the book and what I'm about to point out isn't in the book, that's fine. As far as the overall show is, I can see it's entertaining. I think it holds people's attention, and acting's good. Brie Larson is good. Jacob Pullman, who is Bill Pullman's son, didn't know that. They have very good actors. But let's talk about some of the things in there that just are wrong. First off, Calvin, which is Jacob Pullman's character, he's a scientist. And there's a scene where he's showering in his lab. And what I thought was interesting is they don't mention, why there's a shower in the lab. And his supervisor knocks on his lab door, and he comes to the door sopping wet, and the supervisor is upset about something, but not upset about him showering in the lab. Here's the thing. Labs have showers in them. They're called safety showers, and they're for emergency use. So if you're working with something really hazardous, an acid or something, and you have an accident and you spill it on yourself, that's what that shower's for. Now, there's no stall. Usually, I imagine some of them have more modern labs, maybe they design it in an area that's not exposed to everything in the lab. It's designed so that you can very quickly get to that shower and pull the chain, and that shower will turn on and run for 15 minutes. And the thing is, you got to strip before you do that. You have to set aside all of your modesty, take your clothes off, because if you've got an acid in your clothes, that's not going to rinse off you very quickly with your clothes on. So you have to strip down to fully naked. You got to put your modesty aside. Yeah, your lab colleagues are going to see you naked. That's not a big deal, because if you end up getting scarred later on, that might matter to a partner or something. So that shouldn't either. Also, lab safety showers are very high pressure. I don't know if they were back in 1951, but they're very high pressure. You can't actually, you're supposed to keep your eyes down. So there's actually separate eye wash stations, because if you expose your eyes to that high pressure water, it could actually cause damage. So showering in a lab like that, I didn't see if he was using soap, but there's nothing to keep that water from spraying around that laboratory and getting into all kinds of things where, the contaminants in the water, because it's just tap water. And you don't want those getting into things. And honestly, if your supervisor catches you using the lab safety shower to take a shower, he's going to fire you for that. So that's point number one. And I'm going to say, there's probably things that I have missed, but these are the ones that really struck me. So going on to my next point. So fairly early on, there's a conversation where Brie Larson's character, Elizabeth Zott, says that she's interested in archaebacteria. Okay, so archaebacteria, and that's actually a term that was coined in the late 70s, early 80s, and that's not even used anymore. In 1951, we knew of organisms that were archaebacteria, or Archaea as they're called now, but we didn't know that at the time. They were thought to be just regular bacteria. And the ones that are kind of widespread, as long as there's no oxygen, are what are called methanogens. They are organisms that actually oxygen is toxic to. So they only exist in anaerobic environments. So at the bottom of stagnant water, ponds where there's very little oxygen, in your colon, where it's an anaerobic environment, you have methanogens there. That's where the methane in your farts come from, which is why those are flammable, much to the entertainment of some of the college boys I shared a dorm floor with. But it wasn't until the late 1970s that they were recognized as being something completely different from bacteria. And the person who actually figured that out was a guy named Carl Woese at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And what he started doing, he was trying to look at relationships of multitudes of types of organisms. And what he was doing was looking at their ribosomal RNA. What are ribosomes? Ribosomes are the protein factories in the cell. And they all seem to stem, they have evolutionary similarities, let's say. And he thought it would be possible to determine evolutionary relationships by looking at small sequences of the RNA in the ribosomes. And at the time, sequencing of nucleic acids was rudimentary. You could not do very much. When I was in grad school, I sequenced 300 to 400 bases of DNA at a time. These days, that's nothing. So what he found out was this. Now, I need to preface this a little bit with, there are now three major groups of organisms. There are eukaryotes, which is us and trees and everything that has a nucleus in their cell. And that's kind of a simplified thing about it, but everything that has a nucleus. So we have our nucleic acid, our DNA is packaged in a nucleus. And then you have bacteria. And bacteria, there's no nucleus. The DNA is like it's a circular chromosome, and there's nothing separating it from the rest of the cell. And this is true of the archaebacteria, or Archaea as we know them today. But what he discovered was, in looking at these sequences, that when he got to the methanogens, that they were as different from bacteria as we are. So relationship-wise, there's as much evolutionary distance between regular bacteria, things like staph that cause infections, and methanogens. And then it became very apparent that this is a whole new class of things. Well, obviously, if he did that in 1977, 78, Elizabeth Zott didn't know about that. The next thing, Calvin, at a certain point, he's talking with Elizabeth, and he says, oh, the RNA world hypothesis. Okay. That is something that didn't get talked about until the 1960s, and the phrase RNA world wasn't coined until 1986 by a guy named Walter Gilbert. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but what scientists, molecular biologists, started realizing was that RNA, the mechanism for reading DNA and turning it into RNA, and then reading that RNA and making protein, that was sort of the link among everything that's alive, with the variations that I've already talked about with as far as the Archaea. But the thinking was that because RNA molecules, some RNA molecules, can actually catalyze chemical reactions like proteins called enzymes can, and carry information, which proteins don't do, although we can actually use proteins to figure out what genes are because we're smart. But that because of the fact that RNA molecules, some of them can actually catalyze reactions and also carry information and pass it on genetically, means that maybe there was a time early in the Earth's history where the world was RNA molecules, and that everything else after that kind of, through evolution, came to be. So again, in 1951, that wasn't a thing. And the next thing, and this is the next to last, Calvin mentioned something about nucleic acids coding for protein. Although maybe there was some thought, and I haven't been able to determine if there was some thinking along those lines, but the structure of the DNA molecule wasn't determined until 1953. In fact, Watson and Crick were, crunching data that they took from Rosalind Franklin, the woman who actually did the X-ray crystallography studies that showed the helical nature of DNA. But it was Watson and Crick that took that and figured out the double helix and figured out that the DNA bases were stacked in that double helix, and that there was obviously a mechanism for that to carry information that be used to make proteins. And Rosalind Franklin never got the credit that she should have gotten for that, and unfortunately died of cancer not too many years later, and perhaps because she had been exposed to X-rays during her work. And the final thing is probably a minor niggling thing, is that when you're working in a lab, no safety glasses, no goggles, no anything. And the reason I say it's a minor thing is because in a corporate research lab, you're going to see people wearing safety glasses. But when you go into academic labs, pretty frequently you'll see people who aren't wearing them, or only wearing them when they're really working with something dangerous. But whenever you're doing an experiment, you should have eye protection, just so that you don't have an accident splashing something into your eyes. But that one, I'm willing to let that one go. Well, you may say, well, what difference does it make? These are minor things. Well, consider this. The opening scene of the first episode of Lessons in Chemistry is a scene that has several 1950s era automobiles in it. And I'm old enough to remember those cars when those cars were the cars that people were driving. Just some amazingly beautiful automobiles. If in that scene you had a 1977 Chevrolet Caprice Classic show up, wouldn't you think, wait a minute, what's going on? So if you're going to go to all the effort of making this period piece with all of these things that you've obviously done a lot of work to make sure that it's accurate, wouldn't you want to make sure your science is accurate? The funny thing is, if you go on IMDb and look at the IMDb listing for Lessons in Chemistry, or they have goofs, and somebody pointed out, and of course this is true, this is in the 1950s, and nobody's smoking. I mean, I remember my parents, my dad smoked, but gave it up before I was born. But they had parties, they had people coming over, and everybody smoked. So that is an interesting point. But again, I'm not trying to slight the actors or anybody like that. The actors are working with the material they're given. But it seems to me in this day and age, when we really have a problem with people not understanding science and even having anti-science feelings, because there's a lot of misinformation being spread out that at least strive to get the things accurate. For instance, you know, when Elizabeth mentions archaebacteria, they could have mentioned methanogens, okay? I don't know that most people would care either way, because probably most people don't know what archaebacteria are, or Archaea as we call them now are. So what difference does it make if they don't know what a methanogen is, even though there's a whole bunch of them in their gut churning out methane? So, and I'll finish with, I don't always nitpick about these sorts of things in a movie, because if you look at, for instance, one of Brie Larson's other movies, Captain Marvel, which is a comic book, all kinds of scientific impossibilities in that thing. But it's obviously a fantasy, so it doesn't really matter that much. But this is supposed to be a story that could have happened, and probably happened more times than it should have. So, those are my thoughts on this. What are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments. If I missed something, hey, if anybody out there who's scientifically inclined, if there are things that you saw that I missed, hey, pop them down there below. If you think it doesn't matter, sure, fine. Let me know. If this was interesting and they're entertaining, hit that like button. That's a big help to me. You can pop that little bell to know when I'm putting up videos. And this is probably not going to be the last time that I venture away from photographic stuff. So just be aware of that. I already did it once with that flat earth thing. I might want to do a follow-up on that. Anyway, I'm Todd Banner. I will see you next time.